Money, power, corruption. No, we're not talking about Albany. I'm talking about the Vatican. And there is a new book that digs into the Catholic Church and its incredible history. Now, a short time ago, I spoke to Gerald Posner, author of God's Banker, A History of Money and Power at the Vatican. Listen, as a practicing Catholic, I got to tell you, it was an illuminating but also a tough book in that over 2,000 years, there has been some constants and there has been some division, at least what we want to think of the Vatican, and then also how money has changed hands with the Vatican. And let's try and do a accelerated history if you could. Talk to me about how really everything changed in the 1870s for the Vatican as we know it.
Yeah, because, I think, Richard, what it is as practicing Catholics, you think just of a religion. So you think of, the world's largest religion for Catholics, and it's easy for all of us to forget that it's also a country, or it had been in most of its time for 1,800 years, Pope kings. They ran their own empires, just like the French or British kings. They had 15,000 square miles of Italy, and so they lost that in 1870 and became what we think of as today as Vatican City. They lost the empire, no secular nation. And they didn't get that back for another 60 years. So there was a time when it was just the religion, but then starting in 1929, it became both a country and a religion, and that's that mixture of money that I think makes it so difficult.
Well, let's talk about the late 20s, where Mussolini, in effect, not only empowered the Vatican here, but in fact let the Vatican create the Vatican Bank here, which could operate its own sovereignty.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing. And it's not until 1929, exactly, with Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy, where the Vatican strikes a deal in which the church acknowledges Mussolini as the rightful government of Italy. And as a result of that endorsement, it solidifies his position. And at the same time, he gives them back the right, even though they're a small little postage stamp sized piece of property, he says, you're a sovereign just like a king. And that gives them that ability in the middle of World War II, so 13 years later, to create the Vatican Bank. Just like the Federal Reserve Bank, a mixture of a Wall Street investment bank. And it's that bank that's the source, as you know, of so many of the scandals over the last 70 years, the low points in the financial history.
Well, it wasn't just the popes here. We learned some names to your book, including Bernardino Nogara. Talk about the importance of him and how in many ways he was acted and abetted to do what he had to do, just bring the money in.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely key, Nogaro. And you focus on the person more than anybody else, more than the popes, who's the money man at the Vatican at this key juncture. And they were smart enough, the Pope Pius XI and all of the cardinals around him, when they did the deal with Mussolini, and Mussolini paid them about $1 billion in today's money in compensation for having lost the Papal States. They knew that they weren't smart enough to know what to do with that money and how to invest it. So they looked outside and they found this financial layman, a devout Catholic, Bernardino Nogaro, and he really was a wizard. He was doing arbitrage and moving around gold and doing offshore companies and investments in proxies long before a lot of other people were thinking about it. And he made the Vatican into the modern financial powerhouse that it is, sort of dragging it fast and screaming into the 20th century.
For the laity, like myself, we'd often heard that during World War II, maybe the Vatican turned a blind eye to what was going on, but you can't get through this book without certainty that it was much more entwined than that. And forget about the opportunities, which we'll get into in a second, where popes could have done different. They were very involved with German companies. Talk about, for example, even using the insurance policies of Jews at the time. Give an idea just how not only knowing they were of what was going on, but they used financial interests at the expense of those who died in the Holocaust.
Richard, this was, I think, the most shocking part to me was there have been rumors, as you said, for years that maybe the church did business with the Germans during World War II. I think that what I'm able to show in this book for the first time is that the Vatican Bank was created in the middle of World War II exactly so that the Vatican could stay off the radar of American and British intelligence who were trying to stop countries like the Vatican from trading with the enemy. And they did use Italian proxies, sort of these front men, to invest in German insurance companies and Italian insurers in the killing fields of Eastern Europe, Romania and Czechoslovakia and Croatia, where some of those companies were making outsized profits by his cheating and taking the life insurance policies of Jews sent to Auschwitz and using the cash value right away to increase the profits. Now, did the Pope know about it, Pope Pius XII? I'm sure not. Did the top cardinals know that that's how the bank was making so much money? I sincerely doubt it. I don't think they wanted to know.
And if there are any folks out there who still said, well, the church didn't know about the atrocities that were committed, you talk about that too. Forget the dollars and cents here for a moment. There were priests on the ground that were reporting back to the Vatican, talking about where people were just disappearing for communities altogether. How much of that silence was a concern that, hey, they could come from, they could go for the German Catholics as well. They could go for Catholics in other parts of the world as well if they didn't remain quiet. And how much of it had to do with the financial entanglements that they had with the Germans, let alone some sympathies?
Well, that's a key question. And I think that there's no single reason why Pope Pius XII was not as publicly aggressive in taking a stance against the civilian slaughter. But certainly financials was one of the reasons, a very small one maybe. But there were, as you just hit, a number of reasons. I think that they were petrified in the Vatican that if they took that public stance, that Hitler would just accelerate the killing in the Holocaust and go against German Catholics and send German bishops to concentration camps. They were petrified, of course, of Stalin and the communists. They dreaded them more than they did Hitler, so it was the lesser of two evils. And Pius was the wrong man in the wrong job at the wrong time. And what I mean by that is he had been a great diplomat, a Secretary of State before he was elected Pope in 1939. But his way of speaking was the training of diplomacy, not blunt language. So he didn't speak out. He did things privately, but he never said anything publicly. And unfortunately, they did, meaning the Vatican, did have information from the thousands of parishes across Eastern Europe where the killings were taking place ahead of the Allies about what was happening. They were well placed to do something, and they didn't, unfortunately.
And coming up next, more with Gerald Posner, including the Vatican's role in the sexual abuse scandal.